Hey, what's going on, people? You're on TLDTV and you're watching the awesome podcast. We're joined today by our panel, special guests from all over. How's everybody doing out there? How's our panel?
Very good.
Bro.
Good.
Nice. So we got a nice meaty topic today with everything that's been going on. We're going to be discussing women's safety. So a lot has been happening over the last few weeks. Sarah Everard has kind of been the catalyst for this conversation, and it's caused a lot of discussion all over the world about women's safety. Women, I'm going to start with you because it just feels right. What did you make of the case, just as a starting point in terms of Sarah Everard? And for those who don't know, wasn't on a night out, woman, for all intents and purposes, just traveling home, attacked, killed by a police officer. Ladies, what were your thoughts when you heard about it?
I'm happy to step in. So I felt like this was very close to home for me. I actually live in Tooting, so it's just next door to Clapham. So an area I'm really familiar with. It's an area that I often, move freely around. So I think, first of all, it was just kind of, it just felt very personal, even though you didn't know Sarah personally. And I think there was, a lot of empathy there for the situation. I myself live alone, walk home alone, and it's just something that we should all just naturally be able to do and feel comfortable doing. I think the topic that has come out of this is, the focus around the behaviours that women have when they are alone and the things that they feel they need to do that they don't actually talk about. Things like calling a friend or, holding your keys in your hand, things like that. They're all things I think women have been doing for such a long time, but it's just not been talked about because, unfortunately, it's taken an event like this to bring the subject, to light. So, yeah, obviously the situation's devastating. It's awful what's happened, but one positive is that we can talk about this, and hopefully people who are unaware of the actions or the extents that women go to can become aware and kind of see what it's like to be in the shoes of a woman or just anybody who's walking around alone, vulnerable.
Yeah, nice. ZaZa, Mai, any response to that?
I completely agree. I think for me, what is so shocking about the case is that it's a police officer, like somebody who's supposed to be upholding the law, protecting women. And from the little that I've read, it's like Sarah did everything that we're supposed to do. She told her friend where she's going. She's wearing bright clothing. She's in shoes that she's able to get around easily in. And still, she was a victim of something really horrendous. And like you said, Emma, it's all these things that women talk about that men maybe don't consider, like having to cross the road when you might see a group of guys, even though they're probably not up to anything at all, but it's just having that in your mindset that I'm vulnerable. And I'm glad that people are talking about it, but it's a shame that it's at the expense of not even just Sarah, but so many women's lives being lost in this way.
Yeah, Mai?
Yeah, I don't know the case actually. I tried to understand something. Can you give me a summary on what has happened to the Sarah girl?
Yeah, that was unpacking. I think the folks have touched on it essentially. So, female victim murdered by a police officer. I guess it's kind of like what Emma said there. On the one hand, it's a isolated incident, but I think what's happening is it points to a much broader and wider issue in terms of women's safety. Yeah, and like the ladies were saying just there, it's a
all over
that hasn't really happened.
Okay.
Yeah, it's become quite broad.
Where has this happened actually? In London or in UK or
Sutton, South London?
Yeah.
South London.
I just have something to add. My dad was just telling me that he has not been convicted yet. So he was like, okay, just
That's what I wanted to know.
keep the facts. Yeah. So my apologies. He's not
allegedly did what he did.
That's it.
Yeah. Probably conviction pending, but
yeah, no, let's be honest.
So.
Yeah. LJ, I don't know if you wanted to come in from there. What's been your take?
No, I feel like everyone's right in their own point. I think the reason why it struck a chord so much is for years we've kind of been culturally taught these rules to kind of skirt by not having a conversation about these issues. And I think all these rules are built up. In this case, the lady did absolutely everything she's meant to according to these rules, and yet she was still taken advantage of by someone who should be really in the position of power. He's given that position of power, and we're meant to trust him. I mean, come on, who in a park at night is not going to accept the help of a police officer who shows you his badge? Like, there is no way that she could have escaped this, and I think that's why people have kind of taken such attention to it. I think it's getting stirred in with an awful lot of other topics. It really doesn't deserve to be, because it is such an important issue. But I think these other topics that are being dragged in, again, are doing what these previous cultural rules did and murkying it so much so that we don't talk about it properly. And so nothing gets solved. It just seems like a cycle to me.
Yeah. And Kane?
Yeah. This is something that I've spoke to quite a few people around about it. And I think it is an isolated incident in the case of this was a policeman and there was no escaping it, unfortunately. And so it's horrible, it's gruesome, and I'm happy that the conversations that have come from that are happening. What I've been talking to a lot of people about is because I've been seeing online that people have been saying that men need to be educated. And I very much agree with that, because, okay, with Sarah, it was a sicko, and whatever you could teach this man as much as you want, how he potentially worked was not going to change, because the kind of person to do something like that is not the everyday man that I imagine we see. But the conversations that have come from that about, okay, what LJ said about she was doing everything right, what I've learned, and I think is horrible, is this everything right that women have to do. Like, women shouldn't have to listen to their music quietly. They shouldn't have to walk with their keys in their hand. They shouldn't be scared about crossing the road and all these different things. And that's because men don't realize how opposing they can be to women. And that's the kind of education that I think is really important, because it's a responsibility as men that I feel like we need to learn. Okay, these things that, for example, if I'm walking down the street and I'm walking behind a woman, my education now says to me, no, okay, don't walk behind her, walk ahead of her so that she feels safer. And yeah, it's a horrible word that we have to do that, but me walking ahead of her isn't hard for me. Me walking behind her isn't hard for me, but how she feels would change dramatically. And I think that's kind of the education that I would like to come as a whole to men, is there's loads of different situations that need to change and only men can do them, because unfortunately there's an ignorance from men still, where if a woman's talking about this, men are going to throw their hands in the air and go, yeah, but it's not all of us, and yeah, it's not that deep. Well, it is that deep. How these women
my
feel
response to the
horrible.
education thing, though, is who does the educating? Where does that come in? Is it at home, or is it at school, or is it something new?
Everywhere. The education, whenever you think about things that you get taught, and they're coming from all directions. Something that really struck a chord with me, and I instantly got it. I thought about this kind of behavior where you don't get it because you're a different walk of life, but then you're taught it from all sides and you realize is racism. Because when I see racism and I think, all right, okay, you're not going to understand how that person feels because you're not that person. but you're taught in so many different areas of life that that behavior is incorrect. I think the education for men needs to come from that way, because at first I was kind of ignorant. And I was like, okay, so women should teach this. And then I was like, no, because just because women say it, but men should teach it. I know now when I have my son, I will say to him, look, do this, do this, do this. I imagine his mother will say the same thing. Think about in schools, right? In schools, your women are taught to, like, in my school anyway, a lot of the girls in my school were took to one side. There was like an assembly about it, and it was like, okay, so carry a rape alarm, don't drink too much this, all this kind of stuff. And men never get that. Okay, consent. I think the biggest thing is consent isn't really, there's no education on consent. We all think it's obvious, but so many women say, oh, there's so many times I've been assaulted, and men don't even realize it. And that says to me, there's an obvious consent issue here where men don't realize what they should be getting before they propose that. Exactly. So that's what I took from that. That's what I've took from that anyway, definitely.
Nice. So what I'm thinking, and we've touched on this education thing, which I wanted to come to. As part of this education, what is it that needs to be taught, and what is it that needs to be said?
Maybe it's just having a bit of kind of compassion for somebody else. So I think, you know, some of the things that Kane was saying is spot on. I think sometimes if, for example, a guy catcalls a girl, in his mind he might think he's paying her a compliment, or he might be with his mates and he might think it's a bit funny, and, you know, surely that girl's going to love it. But actually sometimes things like that can be a bit intimidating. But, you know, it's not often, I don't go catcalling men. I'm like, yo, Fitty, like across the room, like, that's not happen. So they're not gonna know how it feels to actually be in that position, because it can be embarrassing, intimidating. You know, sometimes it's nice to have a little compliment thrown your way, but, you know, I think it's just kind of getting them to, you know, maybe a workshop or something, to just put yourself in that person's shoes. If it's never happened to you before, you're not going to understand how that could be perceived, and it's just, you know, a matter of like role play about, you know, perceptions and that sort of thing.
It gives us a good start. Anything else that wants to be added in terms of what needs to be taught? I think I'm kind of looking at the ladies, just because I get to speak to the lads all the time.
I've got more to add, definitely. I think exactly what was just said there, that so I think when it comes to hello?
Yep, I can hear you, don't worry.
Oh yeah, cool. So what I was going to say is, I feel like what I took from that is, because again, when I started having this conversation, and I was like, exactly with like the catcalling and stuff, and I was like, oh, that's something nice, isn't it? Like that's you know, that's a bunch of guys saying that she's attractive, but very much so, that's a perfect example of, okay, that's very much from our side, but how does she feel in that situation? And then I realized, you know what, treat people as individuals and really think about, like, would that person enjoy that? Don't presume that, oh, that's a compliment, so I can do that. Do you know what I mean? And I really started to think about all these behaviors that men do, thinking that's a compliment. Like, I'm going to buy you a drink. Like, what's wrong with you? And it's like, well, wait a minute. What if you don't want the drink? What if you don't want to give you a number? Oh, you're asking her for a number. Oh, well, like, why do men think, oh, yeah, you look stunning in that dress? Okay, that's a great opinion to have, but why do you need to put that across to her? Do you know what I mean? Well, and that's just all these things that, like, as men, we do thinking, yeah, like, it's good though, isn't it? Well, is it though? And even if it is, do we need to do it? And does that person feel that way? All this mindset and all this is the kind of thing that I think men need to be taught. And we need to start thinking, okay, just because we think it's good, does it mean it's good? And why don't we get to know that person first? So let's have, oh, come on, hi, nice to meet you. By the way, I just want to say, I don't mean to be rude, I just think you look really good. I'm going to leave that compliment there and let it just land. And if, you know what, you enjoy your night. That's the kind of difference, you know what I mean? But I think I
do think it's important to separate that sort of behaviour, because although it's not liked by a lot of people, it's very different from murdering and cutting up a lady after you rape her. Did she cut her up? It was awful, regardless what he did. There's such a difference. And I think I had a really interesting conversation with a friend about this earlier, and he gave me a view of it I never thought of. And he was saying, he watches a lot of criminal shows anyway, and he was saying that it's part of the mental health conversation. He says, men like that, they associate violence with sex or intimacy, and it all harkens back to the mental health issue. He says if you look at all the serial killers, not to say that every rapist is a serial killer or vice versa, but there's this underlying mental association with all these crimes that, you know, sex and violence go hand in hand. And I think if you manage to catch that early by having a robust and a strong mental health system in place, because it isn't, it is awful. Okay, it won't solve rape, it won't solve it, but God, having less people with that ideology is going to reduce the chances. It has to.
I think that's kind of getting onto like rape culture, which is something else I wanted to discuss as well.
Yeah.
Which is like, again, it can be like misogynistic and bigot, like, oh yeah, and like in a lab's group chat, you might have like rape jokes and yeah, you know what I mean? And even the time it's described like, oh, she was raped. No, he raped her. Do you know what I mean? So again, I agree. I do think that mental health, and again, part of those conversations that need to be had, I just feel like same way we pull women aside and say, by the way, these are the dangers of being a woman, the same way you should pull men aside and say, these are the responsibilities of a man. That's all for me, that I think that's the first step towards a better society for women and everyone. That's what I'm saying.
If I can bring in ZaZa, in terms of that, because I hear what you guys are saying in terms of the culture. And as part of that culture, I think there's a big business element. So like there's a trickle down where the WhatsApp group chat is kind of on the lower end of scale. And on the higher end, we have your 50 Shades, we have your 365. Yeah. What do we do with all of this stuff? Because that kind of what LJ was saying there, in terms of those links between, you know, this kind of violent element, and it's almost like, you know, it borders on abuse at the best of times, but it's like seen as a positive thing sometimes in the media and the images that we're presented with.
And it's difficult because obviously a group WhatsApp chat, even though it's on a micro scale, it's still a representative of, you know, people's ideologies. And, you know, there's things that we just shouldn't be joking about. When it comes to stuff like 50 Shades of Grey and, you know, that whole thing, I think we have to separate the issue. The issue here is consent. You know, some people consent to a whole bunch of weird stuff that, you know, you and I, the average person, wouldn't, but they've still given their consent. So this isn't an issue of, you know, what sort of activities you're doing. It's have you consented or not? And I don't think that this is necessarily linked to what's happened with Sarah Everard or you know, women's safety in general, because I think it's on society as a whole to teach men how to be men. And, you know, I'm not a feminist. I'm proud to say that I believe that men and women have different roles. They're equal, but their roles are very different. And I believe it is a man's job to protect women, to love women, to care for them. And, you know, even something like just being aware, you know, having conversations between guys, like when you see your friends speaking about a woman, you know, in a way that you know is not appropriate. Should they speak about your mom or your sister or, you know, your cousin like that? It would be a completely different story. So I believe that people understand when a line has been crossed, but it's that there's so little regard for people outside of our sphere that it's okay when you know, we can degrade or speak about other people in a careless way. But I think it's like catching one another on those things, like, hey, you know, what you just said, okay, you think it's a joke, but actually that's not cool. And maybe some ideas behind that are evident that, okay, maybe you're not aware of it, but it's something that we need to discuss. And I think even more educations, as much as they're taking women aside. And I remember we were giving like a rape alarm. We were told, well, my mum, she's like, you know, don't wear certain things, make sure you cover your drink when you're out, make sure you don't come home on your own, like get a taxi and all these things. It's like, okay, this is good advice, but also what advice has been given to men, like, and yes, obviously there's a difference between having mental issues and being a sick individual. I wouldn't even necessarily say this is mental health, because I don't want to give somebody an out, you know, if it's not mental health, if you just have a horrible desire within you to hurt someone, you know, and I don't know, it's just, I think it's a massive, massive conversation, and it needs to be systematic, you know, not just reactionary, but really like teaching young boys from very, very young, because that's when all of this starts, you know, in the formative years. You know, and I've heard these crazy suggestions like having curfews for men and things like that. That doesn't solve anything. It really, really doesn't.
No, because ultimately, if you're a lioness and you're about to pounce on your prey, you're down in that grass and you're not letting that prey catch a glimpse of you, and you're going to catch your prey off guard. It doesn't matter how prepared that individual is. If someone wants to do something, they will find an opportunistic moment to do it because they're a predator. And yeah, completely, like, we can all take precautions, and rightly so, we should be taught about them. I myself purchased one of these little rape alarms a couple of weeks ago. I've never felt the need to carry one before. But ultimately, if someone wants to get you, they're going to get you. And that's exactly right about the educating from a young age on both sides, because the more understanding everybody has holistically of what each sex experiences and what each sex's responsibilities are, that's the only way you can nip these things in the bud, really. Just about the respect element for each other.
Yeah. Mike, would you have any advice in terms of advice that you'd offer to men?
To men, well, first of all, policemen and all those like protective forces, basically they're trained in a different way than average people. So I would probably put them in a category of someone that is like differently simply programmed or brought up, you understand, educated. So their nervous system even reacts differently. But when it comes to education, maybe I wouldn't give advice to men, because as I said, it's like it just starts in the formative years, as she said, into like it's a deep programming sometimes, you know. But I would maybe teach women how to respond to the cues they get from any men, you know. This is what I would implement in education, basically, like teaching women actually how to respond rather than react, you know, because you don't know what kind of person you're dealing with, and whatever kind of reaction you're having internally, it's something that, you know, I would teach women how to respond to that rather than react, because to get out of it safely, you know, because you don't know what kind of, because we've all been raised in different environments and different circumstances, and I can't just like give one advice to all mankind. I mean, all men. Different cultures raise different people, and different families raise different people. So maybe just like one of the things that I would implement, I would apply, I would bring in the educational system, maybe like teach women how to respond to the cues they get, like any kind of fear that is being triggered inside of them, like how to respond to that in order for them to get out of the situation safely, basically. Because if you respond to threat with a threat, or with like not accepting, if we teach women that simply like some brains function differently, they will be able to, they will be able to integrate that, to understand that, and then respond to the situation, respond to the reaction in an appropriate, in a very mature way, actually, very, very wise way, in a way, to get out of it safely. Because as I said, we cannot, in my opinion, I cannot blame really the policeman. You understand? I'm not saying that the act, yes, but the man is simply like maybe programmed a certain way, you understand? So maybe he was internally triggered by something that you and I cannot explain rationally, but he's been triggered by something inside of him, and therefore he reacted a certain way. This, just like he said, like maybe violence is actually intimacy to him. So it's like, maybe he couldn't, maybe he thought that, showing a woman love towards her. I'm just saying that the way they think, the way they.
It doesn't excuse what he's done, but like you try and understand.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No. But
not at
all. We don't know how people think and associate things. Like it's, I cannot find out for myself, at least for someone else that I know so little. But we think very differently, and yeah.
Yeah. And LJ, for you, why do you feel like it became a man issue rather than a police issue? Or do you feel like it was a natural evolution of the discourse?
Sorry, you broke up a little when you started the question.
Yeah, just I wanted to know why do you feel it turned from a police issue into a all men quote unquote issue? Because I know historically, when police have committed a crime or something like that, often the brunt is targeted at the police force specifically, whereas this one was a lot more dispersed. Why do you think that was?
I think it's a symptom of the times more than anything. We're more polarized than ever, and no matter what you do, each side is going to take a very strong stance. And I think it gets muddled in with a lot of other things. And I think that's because it's been brought to attention by this kind of they are left-leaning crowd, the people particularly that have turned up on the streets. It's been amplified with these other messages and these other stuff, like whenever they get interviewed on telly, they don't just talk about it, gets brought up about their own experiences, how men have always been like this. And it starts, I don't know, it seems like at some point, some of these people want to tar all men for some reason, is what it feels like to me. And I don't understand why, because it doesn't help the problem. But I think it's something to do with this hate of the patriarchy and all men being associated with it. I don't know, but it's, yeah, I think it's being amplified by a crowd with a particular mindset. And I think that's how it gets muddled in with all these other topics too.
Yeah, let me throw this to Emma before I go to Kane. Emma, are all men responsible in some way?
No, they are not responsible for what happened to Sarah. Not all men are responsible for that, but all men have a responsibility to conduct themselves in a certain way and be respectful. Women feel it's their responsibility to conduct themselves in a way where they have to be on edge, and men should reciprocate that by operating on a more considerate basis. I don't think all men are to blame. I think, as LJ was saying, there's a number of contributing factors, unfortunately, in these situations. Extreme views do tend to surface when it's an emotive topic. But yeah, ultimately, no, but I do think they could do better and more could be done.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Kane, what's your experience from on the receiving end? You're a good-looking guy. How,
What do you mean by receiving them? Like,
so with the catcalling context, right? From I'd say it was kind of foreign to me from a young age, but I saw guys that it's like it worked for them. The level of resilience was just insane. I've been in like one spot for a few hours, and then there's been a couple of guys there, and literally every girl that walked past like the day, and then and they'd leave with like a few numbers and that kind of thing. And I guess in my mind, the issue always was it's like they wouldn't do it if there wasn't some type of reward there. From your perspective, though, just because I think we heard from the ladies' perspective on the uncomfortability of the experience, how have you found it in the other way around, being approached by a woman, or have you ever had a comment or anything like that?
Yeah, man, without getting like all the time. No, but like, I remember like one particular time I was on holiday actually, and I'm from like Manchester. And I think a lot of people know that how in like particularly London, things can be a little bit more upfront and forward. And I remember I was at this all-inclusive hotel. I was just waiting to get my food, and this girl from London just came up to me and she just put it on me. Like she was just like, "You're so handsome. Like, hey, how are you doing? You okay?" And like, I could just tell in her eyes like she was feeling me and what was on the cards. And for me, that was quite like I never had someone like come on to me like that so like abruptly before. And I remember being like, I'm okay, thank you. Like I'm just trying to enjoy my holiday. Like, and so I kind of like I have been in that position. But what I think is really different is as a man, if she tried to fling herself upon me, I could be like, hey, behave yourself. And that's the end of that moment. But as a woman, if a man tries to put himself on her, and she's gonna struggle to put herself on it. There's a whole new level of uncomfortable to be in there. I remember talking to my friends about this kind of situation, and I think to myself, okay, yeah, but she explained to me that okay, yeah, I can say to him, look, I'm not interested, and walk away, but the fear of a woman can be, I don't want this to get violent. I don't want this to get physical. And for me, I've never felt like that because I thought, well, this can get physical. Like, it's not a problem. If this girl wants to get physical, I've got nothing to worry about. Oh, yeah, stop hitting me. Like, that's the end of it. But for her, it could be very damaging. Do you know what I mean? So I'll never feel as uncomfortable as a woman would feel because of that. I have been in some really uncomfortable situations where it's been the other way around, but it will never be to the same degree because of my fears will never be as you know what I mean, as scary almost. That would be my opinion on that, definitely.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that you felt uncomfortable, but you never felt unsafe?
Yes, definitely. It was awkward. It was odd. It was unusual. It wasn't terrifying. It was nowhere near that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can tell this story and be like, oh yeah, that was weird. Oh, that was mad. If that was your way around, and it would be even though it's the same energy could be there, is that the fears are a lot different. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we're doing a rough poll right now. LJ, would you second that? So in terms of manhood, have you ever felt unsafe being approached by a woman?
Being approached? When does that happen?
Fan.
No, I've never really felt uncomfortable like that. To be fair, it's kind of a foreign thing for me, which is why I do try to sit and listen a lot of the time, because it really isn't a topic which I have an awful lot of first-hand experience in. Obviously, I've had girlfriends and friends and situations where I stopped the friends from getting in cars with people they shouldn't and things like that. But it's never been I'm scared for myself. I've been scared for other people.
Yeah, and I'd heard that as well. Like, you might have uncomfortability, and this is even going back to, like, say, like a secondary age or whatever, going forwards, but never unsafe though. And ladies, your experience, do you ever feel like it's crossed over from uncomfortable to unsafe?
To be honest, have these experiences on a regular basis. Like I can just think about the end of last year. I was walking home, a guy catcalled me. I'm sure he was just trying to be nice. I said thanks but no thanks, and then he proceeded to follow me, and then I was starting to think, right, okay, like this. But what mine was saying, I was like, how can I talk this man down without getting irate, because that doesn't get anyone anywhere. And then he was following me it felt like he was following me for ages, saying what he was saying, some comments about my appearance. And then he actually tapped me on the shoulder, and I just to grab me, and I just said to him, hey, please stop following me, because you're beginning to make me feel really uncomfortable now. And I was like, I'm sure you're just trying to be nice. I was like, thanks for the compliment. I was like, I'm not interested. I lied. I said I had a boyfriend. I don't. And he was like, oh, he was really offended that I told him he was making me feel uncomfortable. And I'm like, but you can't just grab people in the street. Like, it's really inappropriate. And he obviously was just lacking that self-awareness. But I'm sure he wasn't trying to be threatening. It just came across that way. And I spent the rest of that walk home feeling terrified, looking over my shoulder, thinking he was going to follow me. Because, as I said, I'm not going home to anyone. I'm going home, and then I'm at home by myself, and I'm worried that he's seen where I've gone. And that's just one occasion that I can think of recently. There's definitely been more than that.
Yeah, ZaZa?
Like yourself, like it happens on a regular basis, like getting catcalled. I mean, I have to be honest, like I think someone mentioned earlier, like it is an ego boost. Like, okay, cool, I'm attractive, whatever. But there have been occasions where, especially when you're declining someone's advances, I try and be polite anyway, just because I've seen when, women essentially say no a bit forcefully, sometimes it can just escalate. And even that in and of itself is like, you're, as a woman, almost having to apologize and be really like, oh, I'm really sorry, but I'm not interested. Or I used to, when I was younger, say, oh, I've got a boyfriend. I do have a boyfriend now, but I still don't even like to use that, because surely no should just be no.
Exactly. I agree.
Don't try. If I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to talk to you. I shouldn't have to explain. But there was one time, a catcall kind of turned strange, and this guy grabbed my palm, and I was like, this is assault. Like, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I remember calling the police and just thinking, oh my goodness. Like, and it might sound like, oh, this is so minor, like someone grabbed your bum, like whatever. But
no, it's not. It's definitely not.
It's like, I don't know you. I don't give you consent. And even to have a conversation, you're supposed to ask, like, is this a good time? Are you free? Do you want to talk? Not just assume that you have the right to talk to someone. And I don't even think this is just a male thing. I think this is just a human decency thing. Like, someone doesn't want to engage in conversation, we should just respect that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
And to complete our poll, our niche poll here, have you ever felt unsafe after being approached?
Yes, many times. Yes. I've actually had, maybe not in approach, because in an approach I usually succeed in getting them away from me. But I've actually invited people in my house that after a while, I would, kindly say, it's time to go, and they wouldn't leave. And I had to learn this kind of responses, as I was talking about, to just literally, I don't know what I'm dealing with. They're I see that something is not secure here, it's not safe. So I just try to be more like, I'm not trying to play doll or anything like that. I'm just gonna wait for him to actually understand that I'm not going to engage in anything anymore, and I just want him to leave, for example. And this has happened multiple times, and I think that some men are just like, not all in all cultures, but some men really are brought up like that, to not understand a woman's no, to not appreciate at all. It doesn't exist. I don't know, maybe we as women, we know how that feels.
Yeah.
But then I'm thinking about this, because conversely, in all the films that you see sometimes a guy speaks to a woman and she doesn't immediately say yes, or she rejects him, and it's like there's something romanticized about really pursuing someone and like, oh, I've won her heart or something, and it's like, that doesn't exist. Just leave her alone. Like, yes. Persistence is good if you know she's actually interested, but if she's not, leave it alone.
Yeah, I guess, lads, maybe we can flip it and give some insight. All of the reasons we'll give you will be nonsensical, but we might be able to shed some light on it in terms of the why that happens. And I think, like you said, I don't know when it starts, right? But at some point there is a persistent programming, and it's not so much a lack of respect of the word no, but I guess I think men genuinely believe no doesn't mean it's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Kane, run with it. Why do you think that guys, no isn't a cutoff, a deal breaker?
Yeah, I first of all, like, no should be enough, 100%. And I'd be lying in saying, oh, I've not seen friends or myself where I've been persistent in the right way and it's been successful. But I think now I'm educated, I just think it's too risky right now. Men don't have the, what's the word I'm looking for? They don't have the right to be persistent anymore, because too many men are too persistent. So we've lost that right now. And once we know how to treat women correctly, and as a whole women go, well, I wish guys would try a little bit harder, and it's a safe environment for women, and they feel like it's very rare or it's zero now that men are overly persistent, maybe we can start talk about having that given back to us. But right now, too many men are too persistent. So we all need to just dial it right down to, yeah, no, okay, we'll leave it there then. For me, that's what we need to go back to basics for, because too many people are fumbling persistent with aggressive and all these different things. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I understand. Like, yeah, there's a few women like we've already discussed. There's a few men that like being that a catcall. Oh, you know what? Thank you for that. But how many women has it been negative and become a problem? And I'm sure, speaking for women, and I do apologize for this, but I'm sure women as a whole would prefer zero catcalling and zero ego boost than, you know what, 1 in 9, I do feel good and it's nothing more. Do you know what I mean? I think that's my kind of feel on it. I do think, yeah, guaranteed, like, there's a few men out there who I'm sure very, very rarely do anything incorrect, and they always try to do things right, but there's too many men that do it wrong. And I feel like we should just cancel that culture of persistence. She'll come round and I'll work on it. I just don't think it should be a thing anymore. I'll be honest, like, if I'm trying to pursue a woman for that kind of agenda, I found that being polite is a lot more effective anyway. So there's no real reason to be persistent anymore. If I walk up to a girl and say, I just want to be honest with you, I think you're a really good looking girl, hope you don't mind me saying that. I was hoping to get to know you a little bit more tonight. Would there be a possibility we could do that? Yes or no? No? Fair enough. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you. Yeah? Fantastic. What's your name? No, personally, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't feel like anybody could be offended there. And I've said what I'm interested in politely. She's understood it. She said how she feels about that. That's the end of that. That's for me where I think it should be up to right now. trying again. Why is it a no? All these things is going too far already now. She's already said
Yes.
no, just leave it there. If she changes her mind, she knows where you are in the club. Do you know what I mean? It's as simple as that.
Yeah, LJ, help us out, because I've heard wedding speeches that, you know, if you take away the context of the wedding, it just sounds wild. It's like, you know, I rejected him so many times, but you know, he kept showing up at my house. He called like 25 times, and now, you know, help us out. What is going on with men, and what do they need to learn from this no situation and the value of it?
I mean, I think most of us, I can't say all of us, but I think most of us generally are in agreement that behaviours need to be changed in the general public. But these behaviours, I believe, they're culturally enforced. So how do we enforce change in culture? Governments have struggled with that for centuries. How do you enforce not catcalling? But is that our line? Because essentially what we're doing is we're saying is that we need to decide where the line needs to be for sexual assault or low-level sexual assault. Now, we're all saying, you know, everyone has ideas of what's wrong and what's right. However, if we're going to enforce change and we're going to try and actually resolve this, we need to decide where that line is. So is catcalling across the street, is that illegal? Can you be arrested for calling? Because now you're interfering with freedom of speech too. So it's really difficult to enforce because it's so culturally ingrained. So how do you change a cultural opinion, particularly when it's ingrained in only a small percentage of men, really? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's kind of where the problem lies, is how do you enforce cultural change?
Education. I'd say education, because once you know the effects that you can have on someone, and I think that's what it comes down to. So if I know if I said to all my friends, look, before you do that, just think about whether or not you know that's what she wants, and would that be beneficial for her? Or is it beneficial for you in front of your friends? Then instantly, nothing's necessarily illegal, but the mindset on the action has changed, and therefore it's less likely, and a new level of consideration has been given. So we're not saying, no, that's illegal, no, you can't do that. We're just teaching people the responsibility of their actions so that they look at these situations differently, and hopefully it leads to a different behavior in those situations as a whole. That's why I think it comes down to education on consent and responsibility.
But doesn't the education take a generation to get through to the general public?
Better late than never. Better late than never. Like,
but we're having protests now about changing the law.
That's correct.
Isn't it? Like, we can't think ahead of 4 years.
Okay. And I think, and this is just my personal opinion, I think these conversations need to be had, and whenever they come into effect, it's better late than never. Like, okay, you're right. I think the question earlier about why are these conversations had now, why this Sarah's case led to this whole new thing, is because we're a generation with social media. And people that didn't used to have a voice now have a voice. We're like a generation of who are actively seeking change. And if you see something, we'll talk about it. 8 people will talk about it. Those 8 people will form a group. That group will go protest, and it'll be then brought to the surface. So I think, yeah, it's late. Yeah, is it going to be 100% first time round? No. But I think it's conversations that need to be had. Every time say, for example, this podcast, if one man listens to this and goes, right, you know what? I never realized that she could feel that way when they're doing that. We're heading in the right direction. And I think that is a start. It's not is it a complete solution for formula for success? Not necessarily, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And I'm always happy to take a step in the right direction instead of staying where we are.
Yeah, nice. So LJ and Kane have given us a summary there. Just as we end, Emma, what would you like to see going forward? How would you like to see things shaped differently in the coming years?
Well, we keep using the word education, but I just think it's the obvious one, isn't it? I think because I think the problem is what I want to see is people doing something about it, because the thing is I know we're doing it now, we're all sat around talking about it, we can all talk about this conversation over and over and over, and it can go round and round, but I want to see stuff happening. I think protests and things are physical, and there's something which I know we're going to come on to, and they have a message, but it's like a temporary action. I think there's a long term, we need to plan, we need to have milestones, we need to hit those milestones, and only once we hit the first one will we move on to the next and the one after that and the one after that. I just think I would like to see a plan, and I think it needs to encompass all ages, all backgrounds, all areas of work, places of work, schools. It just needs to hit, and it needs to hit hard, but there just needs to be a plan soon.
Okay, so planning, education. I guess the best we've got so far. ZaZa, how did you feel about the undercover officers in venues? Mean anything to you all?
Undercover officers in like...
Yeah, so that's been the
nightclubs, was it?
Yeah, the grandest response so far is to to sneakily have undercover officers around in clubs and such.
I mean, yeah, it could be a good thing, but at the same time, surely there's officers in the clubs anyway, like they're just off duty. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't get why it has to be that in order to address something that's internal. Like, obviously, if you're doing 25 in a 20-mile zone, the presence of a police officer in the car is going to mean that you're going to slow down and go 20. But when he gets out, if you have the mindset that, okay, now I can do 50, it's internal. It's not upping, police presence or things like that. While that might have a benefit, it might have an immediate effect that it stops. I think it's more the ideology and the mindset behind it. So,
okay, ideology and mindset. And any final thoughts on what we do going forward?
More to talk about it. I don't know. More podcasts, more conversations.
Okay, cool. All right, people, you've been watching that awesome podcast. Thanks for being with us today. Like, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And we keep it going till next time. Goodbye from me and goodbye from our panel.
Bye.